Hello Simmers and welcome to another video. Today we will not be flying, or at least not virtual flying, but given a lot of comments that I received on a number of videos asking me what flight planning software I'm using, I thought it might be a good idea to do a video on that particular program. Because the program that I'm using for my flight planning is Professional Flight Planner X by Aerosoft, where the X doesn't stand for X-Plane but for FSX, because this program is already a couple of years old, and it was originally developed for X-Plane and of course later prepared. So it is Aerosoft's Professional Flight Planner X, which means that you can buy it, as far as I know, only online at Aerosoft. And well, as I mentioned, it was developed for Flight Simulator X, so you won't find it in the Explain 11 section. If you look it up there, there's nothing. But if you go to Flight Simulator X on the website, to the tools missions, you increase the amount of products per page, then you will find it down here. Here it is. And it will cost you 51 euros, or 50 euros 79 cents, but anyway. Which is, I think, well, it is a lot of money, but I don't think it's that expensive. Like I said, I used this program for a couple of years now, and almost prior to every flight, I make a flight plan in there, so it's used extensively, and I think it's very, very nice what you can do with it, and I will show you that in a minute. And if you own the program, you can also buy a service subscription for 1 year. That will cost you 15 euros. And that will give you access to real-time weather data, real-time nets, so North Atlantic tracks, etc. But more on that later. But this is highly recommended by me to do this, because the flights that you plan will be planned with the actual data for the moment that you are using the software, which I think is pretty cool, especially if you use real-world weather add-ons. So for instance, real-world weather connector in X-Plane, or maybe Rex, or anything like that in FSX or prepared. So if you have the program, well, this is what you get. This is the initial user interface, map of the world you can zoom in and out of, and you get a schedule and some blocks up there. But let's explore the program by actually planning a flight. So let's just see what's at the world map. You can put in borders for the information regions. You have either the flight or the upper information regions, and if you press that, you will get the borders visualized on the map. What you can also do is visualize the airports, and they are divided into 3 categories. You can either set large airports, medium airports, or small airports, or just select every category there is. And well, you can see that both the US and Europe are covered with airports quite densely, and some other regions are very scarcely covered. So that's nice to know. Now, I usually set it to large airports because most of my flights are done with airliners flying to and from the major airports. But especially if you like to fly GA, it's very convenient to use small airports because, well, if I zoom into my home country, the Netherlands, for instance, if I select large airports, I only get like Amsterdam, Rotterdam, some major Air Force bases. If I select medium airports, I get the Kooi Naval Station, Lelystad Airport, which has a lot of GA traffic, and Teuge Airport, which also has a lot of GA traffic. But if you select small airports, then you also get like Hilversum Airfield, which is a grass runway, Texel, which is also a grass runway, Drachten, which is a small airport with a concrete runway, by the way. But that's if you want to plan your flights for GA, you will usually only use the smaller airports, unless you are flying, for instance, into Amsterdam Airport. Sometimes they do that for practice, but most of the time you won't. But anyway, that's options that you have, and it's flexible. That's a good thing, I think. Now, the other thing that you can visualize on the map are Nav Aids. So if I press this one, these are the Nav Aids, as in radio beacons. So VORs, NDBs, stuff like that. So if you would go to this specific position on Earth, you would actually find a physical radio beacon broadcasting a navigation signal. They are in here, and you can also toggle intersections. And as you can see, there's a lot more of them around the globe. It's always nice to see. But of course, intersections can only be used if you have like a flight management computer or a GPS with the database that includes the intersections. Talking about databases, Professional Flight Planner actually uses AROC cycles, and you can update them with the online AROC cycles that are available for flight simulation. So Navigraph, for instance. So that's pretty nice. You can see the warning sign here, meaning that my AROC cycle is out of date. I don't really care about that too much. I hardly ever fly online. And for just desktop flying, I think it's nice to have one cycle from the current year, and I leave it with that. I usually buy one cycle a year. But if you are online flyer and you want to update every month, that's possible. You can update this every month and it will just use the new database to build your routes. So again, flexible. You can put it to your liking. The other thing that you can visualize on the map is the routes. So you have the high airway routes. And the low air routes, or the directs. And well, what are air routes? Well, basically in an airplane, of course, it can fly, but it's a passenger airplane or a commercial airliner, I must say, cargo or passenger, is not allowed to fly just anywhere, because basically all airspace is military except for some corridors. Now, these corridors are called airways, and that's what you see here. So every airplane has to follow this. But sometimes it is allowed to cross a section, and then ATC will give you a direct to. But it's quite handy, especially in the route planning phase, which will come later in this video. And another very neat thing that is in here, and especially if you have the data server subscription, is you get the actual nets, and that can be North Atlantic tracks to cross the North Atlantic. It can be the Pacific tracks, and even the Australian ones. But for now, I'll just focus on the, for instance, eastbound to cross the Pacific, or to cross the Pacific westbound. You can put in nets westbound, meaning from Europe to the US, or eastbound. They're still up right now. And you can also visualize the wind. And the funny thing is, if you put your nets over the wind, then you see why it is important that they are visualized in this system. Because as you can see, the eastbound nets from the US to Europe, they will follow the jet stream. And the jet stream is like a lane of high-speed winds that's always running from west to east over the Atlantic. And of course, when you are flying from the US to Europe, you want to gain as much tailwind as you can. So you will want to fly, well, in the jet stream as much as you can, because that will greatly reduce your flying time. But when you are flying westbound from Europe to the US, you want as little headwind as possible. So the westbound tracks, they are created to avoid the jet stream as much as possible, to have the lowest amount of headwind on your flight. So these nets, they are put together multiple times a day, just to avoid, or basically to adjust to the current jet stream, because the jet stream moves around a bit. So what is convenient today might be inconvenient tomorrow, because maybe the jet stream has moved up north, and when you are flying this particular track, you might encounter a lot of headwind, whereas you were flying a bit more to the south, you would actually have less headwind. So that's why they are derived every day, and they are derived from the wind data, and you only have the wind and the nets data when you have that data server subscription. So that's why I really recommend you to do that if you have the program. But be aware, I'm not really sure whether it's included in the initial when you buy it. It might include the first year. I'm not really sure, so look into that. Don't go buy two at the same time. But after some time, it will end, and then you have to buy another subscription to the data server. Well, the FIRs, UIRs, I already mentioned that. These are Class 2 airspace that you can visualize. The winds, we already had that one, and these are adequate airports. That's only usable when you are actually planning a flight and you have selected an airplane. And this is Grid Mora. Now, Grid Mora gives you elevations. 117 means 11,700 feet, which is the minimum altitude you have to fly to be clear of obstacles in that grid. It's another discussion, something I might go into a bit deeper in the future, but for now it's just nice to know that it's included in Professional Flight Planner X should you need it. So like I said, well, that's what you can do on the world map. So for these options alone, it's already quite a useful tool. But of course, the main objective of this tool is to plan flights. And when you plan flights, I'm an X-plane pilot. I used to fly FSX. I switched to X-plane 10 a couple of years ago, and then to X-plane 11, and I never regretted the move. But when you plan flights with Professional Flight Planner X, you might encounter a difference in flight plan length. The amount of miles might differ from what you get in your flight plan in here and what the flight management computer in X-plane will tell you. It's usually, I've never seen it more than 50 miles, that's 50, but it's usually a lot less. And I don't really know why that is, but I suspect it has got something to do with the virtual worlds in both FSX and X-plane. I think they are different, and that causes a little bit of, well, it's not really incompatible because you can just use it, but you just have to keep in the back of your mind um, that the actual flight in the sim might be a bit longer or shorter than what your flight plan is giving you. But that's only a minor inconvenience. And if you look at the benefits of using this program, I'm willing to take them. So let's just plan a flight. Let's put in the flight information regions, and let's say that we want to fly from two new airports that I have, which are UK 2000's Edinburgh and UK 2000's London Luton. So it's going to be a domestic flight in the UK, and let's just plan that flight. Now, if you want to do that, of course, first you have to decide what type of airplane you will be using. And you can add or adjust airplanes with this button up here. That's the aircraft manager. If you go to the aircraft database, you get a list of all the airplanes that you currently have in the planning tool. So what I usually do is I take, for every type of airplane that I have in the sim, I make one entry in PFPX. You can make as many as you like. For instance, the A320. I'm a big fan of the flight vector A320 nowadays. I made one entry with a French registration for the Air France A320. But I have a lot of liveries for the A320. So what I can do is I can make an entry for every livery that I have, so I have the correct registration. I'm not going in that deep, but I know some people are really keen on that. It is possible. Um, but when I use the flight vector A320, I always get more passengers from the flight plan than I can actually fit in the plane in the sim. So I want to edit the data for this plane. So I just select it, press edit, and then I get all the information about this airplane. So it's an A320 with the type of engines. You can select various types. You can set your weights to kilos or pounds, lengths to meters or feet, etc. But what I want to do is change the passenger capacity, which is down here. Because the flight plan uses 145 as the maximum number of passengers for this plane, while in the sim, the flight vector A320 has a maximum of 136 passengers. So I just alter this to 136. I save this, and now this is changed. Maximum number of passengers is 136. And you can do that with all sorts of data, performance data, whatever. You can go online and try to find performance files for PFPX. They are widespread across the internet. So what you can do is, for instance, for the Saab, I think this was a default one. And I also downloaded a couple of other files for different types of airplanes. Like I said with the registration, if you are satisfied with all these data, you can just basically duplicate it, change the registration, and you have a different airplane that you can pick from. So let's just close this. And you can also add new aircraft or, like I said, download a template from the internet and add that one. But anyway, we are going to fly from Edinburgh to Luton. Now, first thing that is important is to know the ICAO codes for the airports that you are flying from and to. So Edinburgh is Echo Golf Papa Hotel and Luton is Echo Golf Golf Whiskey. So I just add the flight and we'll fly from Echo Golf Papa Hotel to Echo Golf Golf Whiskey. And it will immediately draw a line between the two airports. If, for instance, I wanted to fly from Edinburgh to, let's say, Amsterdam, if I press EHAM, it will immediately draw that airport. It will zoom the map that you have here to fit your flight from starting point to destination. GW, we were flying to Luton today. And it will also identify whether it's a domestic or an international or a long range or another type of flight. You can select scheduled air service, non-scheduled air transport, general, military, or other. This is a scheduled air service, but we're not going to repeat it that much. Now you can enter a flight number. There's well, a whole bunch of call signs included in the sim, so you can use anything you like. For instance, if I were to fly a KLM flight, if I just make this KL, it will say KLM. But let's say, let's look online to see if there are actual flights between Edinburgh and Luton. So I usually go to Google, type in the two ICAO codes, and then I usually go to FlightAware. And as you can see, EasyJet operates a regular flight between Edinburgh and Luton. And they even use an A320 every now and then. So if I click that one, here I get all the different information concerning this flight. And this also gives me a flight number. It's EC20 or U220. So let's just make it like that. So U220 or EC20 From Edinburgh to Gatwick, domestic flight, scheduled air service. There are no remarks. The date is today, June the 16th, with the times and the estimated en route time of 1 hour and 10 minutes. And for this flight, we will be using an A320. Save this, and now the flight is put on the schedule, but as you can see with red letters, which means that the planning isn't completed yet. So if you want to plan the flight, you can either press this one or you can press it over here. It doesn't really matter, does the same thing. And then you go to your planning interface, which runs top to bottom through flight, aircraft, payload, fuel, costs, route, alternates. So let's just go through all these boxes. Flight number is U220 or EC20, like we mentioned, EGPH, EGGW. We can expect takeoff runway 24 based on the current wind and weather. So if I put in the winds here, you can actually see that the winds are blowing from the southwest, so 24 seems appropriate. And we can expect to land on runway 26 in Luton. We expect 10 minutes taxi out time and 5 minutes taxi in time. It's a domestic flight scheduled air service on June the 16th with 1 hour 10 minutes en route time. The aircraft that we will be using is an A320-214 standard configuration, empty weight, maximum takeoff weight and maximum landing weights are included. It will give you climb speeds 250 below 10,000 feet, 300 knots above 10,000 feet or Mach 0.78. It will cruise at Mach 0.78 and it will descend initially at Mach 0.78, then at 300 knots and below 10,000 feet at 250 knots. The cruise altitude will be optimum. You can also select max or open, optimum or open max, where you can just ignore any altitude restrictions en route. We'll just use the optimum altitude. You can select step climbs. We won't be needing that on a short flight like this, but especially when you fly longer, the longer you fly, the more fuel you burn, the lighter the aircraft becomes, the higher you can fly. So especially on transatlantic flights, step climbs are a big thing. But on a route from Edinburgh to Luton, it's not that well. You don't gain much by climbing or descending 2,000 feet on the route. We'll just climb to our cruise altitude, and by the time we reach that, it will be almost time to start our descent again, because this is a very short flight. The maximum altitude that we can fly on is flight level 3, 9, or 8. And the plan altitude, well, we want to plan the altitude by using the minimum amount of costs or the minimum amount of fuel. I usually do minimum fuel. Now we can expect payloads of 91 adults, 1 child and 2 infants. The maximum capacity is 136 passengers. These passengers will have 1,012 kilos of baggage on board. And if I alter this number, you will see that the amount of baggage also changes. So if I make this 50, it will go down. And if I were to make this like 130, it will go up. But let's just say, well, 95 is nice. We have 7,900 kilos of cargo on board, giving us a payload of 17,007 kilos. The zero fuel weight of the airplane with this load will be 59,607 kilos, and with a maximum zero fuel weight for this type of airplane of 62,500 kilos, we are in the green. Suppose I would make this 10,000 kilos of cargo, like 17,936. You will see that the max zero fuel will go red, and this will change from green to orange because now we are too heavy. The zero fuel weight is just too high for the airframe. So that's included as well. Now for the amount of fuel, the trip fuel will be calculated based on the performance data in the airplane configuration. But of course, as in real life, you always have to work with reserves, and we have to add those ourselves, or you can add some extra reserves. I usually add 15 minutes of holding time and 15 minutes of contingency time for a short flight like this. because both Edinburgh and Luton are not that busy airports, so I don't expect to be waiting much longer. But if, for instance, I were to fly from London Heathrow to, let's say, New York JFK, they are both very, very busy airports where it's not uncommon to wait quite long for the runway for takeoff or be put in a hold before you are allowed to land. So then it might be wise to put in like 40 minutes of contingency time based on the expected amount of traffic for your departure or arrival time. But anyway, like I said, 50 minutes of holding and 50 minutes of contingency time, meaning we are capable of flying 15 minutes in a holding pattern, and we can afford to waste 15 minutes due to heavy traffic at the airports. That's basically contingency. Costs, I never use that. That's something that might be nice if you are running a virtual airline. I never use that. And then we come to the most important thing, the route. Right now we have a direct to, which is always the shortest option, but also the less realistic one. Like I said, basically all airspace is military except for some corridors, and we have to follow the corridors. So you will always get an increase from your great circle distance because you have to take D routes to fly across the appropriate airways. Now there are two ways where you can create your route. You can do everything yourself, or you can just have the sim find the route for you. What it also does is it will look up alternate airports for your destination. So if I press this button right now, it will first look up the alternates, and it will give the alternates in this window down here with the ICAO code, the expected runway, the route to that airport, the altitude that you want, and the distance from your destination. So I want to fly to Luton. If I cannot land there, then it's 82.7 miles to this one, EGTC. And now I can press Find Route, and it will give me this with a distance increase of 34%. But let's say I'm not happy with this route because sometimes this program comes up with flight plans that you think, well, I know a more efficient way to do that, and you can just alter these routes. There's no problem in doing that. You just go to this window in here and you press Edit. You will get a pop-up, and here you can basically change everything you like on your flight plan. For instance, we are now flying runway 24 with the GOSA 1 Charlie departure. Let's say I want to go to the south and fly a Tela 6 Charlie departure. And then I don't want to go via, what's it called, Fenwick, but I want to go straight to DCS because that saves me quite a large detour. And let's say that I've given permission by ATC to actually do that. So then I will just move this one over here and I can delete it, or you can just click on the waypoint and press delete on your keyboard, which works a lot faster. And now my distance increase has only been 24%. Now from DCS I will fly, let's see, the Uniform Lima 612 to Calda. And from Calda we'll fly to Manchester directly, and then to Listo. But let's say that I want to fly from Calda to Listo using an actual airway. I can just see whether that's possible, and it should be possible because the Uniform Lima 612 runs all the way to Listo. So I can basically clear Manchester, and when I right click on Listo, I get this one, and then I can select Auto High Route from Calda to Listo, and then it will put in Manchester. That's strange because it should just be doing this one. So let's see if there's a lower air route. Clear Manchester again. And with auto low, then all of a sudden I can fly in a straight line. Now for the arrival into Luton, we can also see whether we have the most convenient star selected, which is the Aske 2 hotel. We're coming in from the northwest. Well, that's correct, but as you can see, there are multiple stars for northwest arrivals. So let's just see how they run and what they do with the distance increase, because you want to increase your distance as little as possible. So let's just see what the ASCA 3 Golf is doing. Well, that goes to 33%. That's a bit too much. Let's see what the 5 Foxtrot will be doing. That's 23. That seems pretty convenient. And we have the Lorry 1 Kilo, also 23. Lorry 2 Hotel, 24, so that's not to be recommended. Lorry 3 Golf, 28. We're not going to do that one either. And the Lorry 5 Foxtrot, which is 23 again. So let's just go with the Lorry 5 Foxtrot standard arrival route for runway 26 in Luton. And that basically concludes my flight plan. So I'm satisfied with this one. I can just press apply. It will save the changes, and here's my new flight plan. Departing Edinburgh, left turn to Tango Lima Alpha, and then straight towards DCS, then via the Uniform Lima 612 to Calda, then the Lima 612 to Listo for the Lorry 5 Foxtrot arrival into London Luton. And now I can just compute the flight. I get a warning. Let's see what that is. Altitude at Ockenham, 18,000 feet, is below the minimum en route altitude. Well, that's something to worry about when you are flying in real life or online, but since I will be flying this flight on my desktop, I don't think that's much of a problem, so I will just accept the flight plan anyway. So I can just release the flight despite the warning, and here we go. Now I get the schedule. I can go to a flight summary, which gives me a summary of my fuel planning and the load planning. I can go to my operational flight plan. I will go into more detail in a second. It will give me an ATC summary, so type of airplane, departure airport with time, the actual flight, the route, and the arrival in Luton. It will give me some weather information for my origin and my destination and all the alternate airports. NOTAMs, or notification to airmen, for all my airports, both departure, arrival, and alternate. And this will give you information like there's a crane operating in the vicinity of Edinburgh at a maximum height of 308 feet, stuff like that. It's all sort of information about abnormalities on or around airports that might be important for pilots to know, especially if you are having emergencies. You will always read them for your destination airport, your departure airport, for your alternates, and if you are flying very long flights, also for your en route airports that are suitable for you to deviate to if there is an onboard emergency. For instance, if you are flying, like I said, from London to JFK, you might also want to include the NOTAMs for Boston because, well, suppose someone gets ill here, you want to divert to Boston as soon as possible. And then it's quite handy to have this information in your flight plan already, so you don't have to look it up at that particular time because you will be busy enough when you have to deviate from your route. And like I said, the warnings. But to go back to the flight plan that we created. Now everything is in here. It's the company flight plan. It's whether it's IFR or VFR. Well, this is of course an IFR plan, EC20. The registration of the airplane, departure and arrival. All weights are in kilos. It will give you the date and time, the name of the dispatcher, and then it will give you the summary for the flight. So departing Edinburgh, runway 24, which has an elevation of 136 feet. Arriving in Luton, runway 26, which has a runway elevation of 526 feet. Alternate EGTC, runway 21, elevated 358 feet and at 83 nautical miles from Luton. We expect to cruise Mach 0.78 Initial altitude is -1, fuel buy is 100%. It will give you the GC distance, the flight plan distance, and the air distance, and the average wind component, which is 4 knots headwind on this flight. Configuration of the airplane is standard. Dry operating weight is 42,600 kilos. We have 96 passengers on board, 7,936 kilos of cargo, giving a complete payload of 17,007 kilos. And the zero fuel takeoff and landing weights, the maximum versus the planned, so you can actually check whether you are below the maximum values for this airplane, which we are. And this is according to plan, and when you get the final load sheet, you will fill in the actual weights for the airplane. So for instance, if you have a no-show passenger, you have less luggage on board, so you can change the zero fuel weight. It will change the takeoff weight, and it will change the landing weight. Then it will give you the fuel, the details about the fuel, the amount of fuel that you have on release, 6,232, and what it consists of. It's the trip fuel. We will be using 2,422 kilos of fuel just to get from A to B. We are obliged to take 5% of contingency fuel, so that's 196 kilos. We need 895 kilos to reach our alternate airport should we deviate from Luton. And the final reserve of 1,175, which is half an hour worth of flying time. I thought that was mandatory by law to always bring that on board, half an hour flying time. But then I entered 15 minutes of holding time and 15 minutes of contingency time, which translates to 589 kilos of holding fuel and 835 kilos of contingency fuel. If you add them all up, you have a minimum takeoff fuel of 6,112. We expect to use 120 kilos of fuel for taxiing, which is 10 minutes, which will give us a release fuel of 6,232. When we arrive at Luton, we expect to have 3,630 kilos left on board, which is enough to fly 1 hour and 22 minutes. If you agree with all that, you can sign it up here. Here's the air traffic control route consisting of your SIT, Tango Lima Alpha 6 Charlie, and then the flight and the star. The alternate planning with the average wind component, the time it will take you to reach the alternate, and the fuel you need to burn to get there, and the route to that alternate. And for your main flight, your planned route, you will get this list of all the individual legs. So we will be taking off Edinburgh 24. Then on the Tango Lima Alpha 6 Charlie SIT, we will fly to Uniform Whiskey. On a heading of 241, we will be climbing in this leg. The wind will be 188 at 19 knots, or at least that's expected. The frequency for Uniform Whiskey is 368, so that's an NDB beacon. The leg will be 6 miles long. We start with 6,100 kilos of fuel, and when we reach Uniform Whiskey, we will have burned 200 kilos, so we expect to reach that with 5,900 kilos of fuel. The leg itself will take us 2 minutes, which will bring the total flying time to 2 minutes. Then we go to this one, which will take us 1 minute, bringing the total flying time to 3 minutes. Now, prior to takeoff, you will always press your chronometer on. And basically what you can do throughout your flight is cross-check whether these values down here, the cumulative time in the air, whether that corresponds with your chronometer. It should be. Because if your chronometer says 10 minutes when you pass Tela, you know you're 3 minutes behind schedule because you should arrive there after 7 minutes in the air. And what you do throughout the flight is you will make notes with your pen about the actual times at which you have passed these waypoints, giving you eventually the exact time that it took you to go from A to B, and you can check whether that corresponds to your flight plan. Finally, it will also give you some wind information en route, that is for various altitudes. And that's basically it for an average domestic or European flight. What it also includes is, well, like I said, the nets. But what also comes into play when you fly transatlantic flights, let's just put one in. So let's add another flight to the schedule. Let's say we fly KLM 641 from Amsterdam to JFK. And we'll fly that with a Boeing 777-200. And I want to plan this flight. I can just go randomize the payload, find the alternates. And now I can place the westbound nets in there. And I can press find route. And now you can see that the flight plan that it derives automatically brings me straight through the jet stream, which is exactly what we don't want. So I want to alter my route and I want to be using one of the nets in here. It will give me a detour, but since it gives me a lot less headwind, I will have to use a lot less fuel. So we're going to alter this plan. Bring in the westbound nets again. And instead of going from Resno to Alry, I want to fly from Resno to Jeonjo intersection. So we have Resno in here. I will delete these waypoints and I want to fly from Resno to Jeonjo using NetGolf. So now I have Resno, NetGolf via these waypoints to Jeonjo, and then we'll fly to Tusky and back, and onwards to New York. So now I've included one of the North Atlantic tracks in my actual flight plan. And when I look at the wind, this will save me quite a lot of headwind on the Atlantic crossing and thus a lot of time. So that's one. But since a Boeing 777 is a twin engine airplane and I have to fly over a vast amount of water, I have to work with the so-called ETOPS or extended twin operations. And that is included in this program, which is pretty awesome, I think. If I go in here, I get ETOPS and I have to pick a scenario. And let's say I have a 777 with a 180 minutes ETOPS, because ETOPS is basically a set of rules that gives you the maximum amount of time that you are allowed to be away from an airport that is suitable to the type of, to facilitate the type of airplane that you are flying. So let's say ETOPS 180, and what I usually put in for a transatlantic crossing at first end is Keflavik, which is big F. There we are. And that will basically conclude my ETOPS setups for this flight already, because when I enter Keflavik as a ETOPS airport, I'm always within 3 hours flying time of an airport, being it either mainland Ireland, Iceland, Greenland, or Canada, or the US. So I'm in the clear to cross the Atlantic right now. And if I just hide the wind and the tracks for a second, this is the circle that they draw for that ETOPS 180 scenario. Should I change this to ETOPS 120 minutes? From big F, it will also alter this circle in a minute. There we go. And I'm still okay because I'm always within 2 hours from either Ireland, Iceland, Greenland, or Canada. So that's the scenario. And well, your type of airplane, if it has ETOPS clearance, it will state the ETOPS scenario that is applicable to that airplane. Um, I just use ETOPS 180 for this one. So let's compute the flights. And we have him without warnings, and then it will just give us everything that we want to know about the flight and that I just explained. So that's also possible, including nets in your flight plan, changing flight plans, ETOPS setup, anything like that is all included. Like I said, the AROC cycle can be updated to your liking, and you can add your own airplanes with the airplane manager, and that basically is everything that there is to this program. I'm sure that there's a lot more, but this is what I use mainly, and why I think this program is really worth the money. It's very extensive. I can imagine if you are a real world dispatcher who knows a lot more about planning flights than I do, you might find even more in here. But I think it's a pretty awesome piece of software. There's also another piece of software that's called TopCat. You can buy that and implement it in here, and then you can also calculate your takeoff landing performance for your flight. I don't have it, I never used it. I know FrugalSim does. There are some videos on his channel covering TopCat in Professional Flight Planner X. If you go to some of his fully loaded videos, I'm pretty sure you'll find it in there because he usually uses that for his flight planning as well. So that's it for this video. If you have any tips, tricks, questions whatsoever, please leave them in the comment section below. Like I said, Professional Flight Planner X to be recommended wholeheartedly. I think it's worth the money, and I hope I give you a good impression to decide for yourself whether you want this program or not. So thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.